teaching by example is a shortcut. It's a shortcut because you don't have to explain. You present the fruition of all what you have developed till you play that note. Literally alive in a note. And then, of course, in another, the next and the following becomes a word, a sentence, a paragraph. Ultimately, the reason we talk is because we hear, since we started listening as babies to the mother tongue, and then all the second, third, and other languages that our capacity of learning adds later in our life, is always from the written onwards, in other words, not by the heard. Of course, you develop a capacity to not have or to have an accent, like I do, unfortunately, in English. But it's genetic in a way. And when I talk about hearing, I don't talk about the words. After all, there are sounds and there are phonemes we produce in order to vehicle the thoughts, the concepts. But the example, when you teach piano, is not to explain. Either because you choose to say, hey, really it's not explainable. You have to feel it, and the only way I can almost irrigate your soul with what I hear in the piece is by playing it directly, which is what a mother does when she speaks to the baby in the crib. She literally pours the mother tongue into the brain cells of the child through the ears. And the ears are this receptacle of miracles, because the baby doesn't hear the meanings, though little and more later they adapt and understand that those vowels and those consonants make meanings. But in the early stages, it's music to their ears, literally. And I think that when we play music, is also music to our ears, literally. And that's why I'm deeply convinced with all these years that we don't play, but ultimately, yes, we touch with our tips of the fingers and action on the piano that produces a sound, and all the rest of the industrial construction of the instrument to project, resonate, and the acoustics and all. The sound that we have in our mind, we imagine it, we idealize it, and then we want it to represent in the reality of our production the idealization in our inner ear. So it's we project what we have heard from what we have read when we learn the score, unless we improvise and compose it ourselves, in which case it's no more the reproduction of what we read. It's only the reminiscence of what comes out of us is a reminiscence of something that might have happened, but we're not really aware of. And I think in some aspects we reproduce elements of music that is in our subconscious, or emotional reactions, connections to sensual, sensorial elements of cold, warm, soothing, or grieving, or anxious, impatience. And there's so many subtle levels in between all these. Mezzo-subtle. How do you bring the phrase from the up G, appoggiatura, to the dominant F sharp? And by the design of the pattern, of the decorative pattern, you reach the leading tone, the A sharp. Of course, you could have gone directly to the point. So why is it so meaningful to take the time to do this delay tactics? Emotional redundancy, terms of endearment. Oh, my dear, I love you. And then you repeat it. I love you, my dear. There is a sense of necessity for the term of endearment to be repeated, perhaps. In any case, when we play the notes of the others, we only have the option to align them or perhaps disorganize their flow by holding back some and let the others flow forward in a rubato if we are under the jurisdiction of our education that in a given style it's allowed. But if we forget our education and we go back to the ear hearing, the emotional, sensorial, intense connection directly between the sounds and how we feel about it without even to be able to verbalize it as babies. But we do. So the ears is for a musician, and probably for not only a musician, an incredible act of filtering noises, resonances, dissonances, consonances, regardless if we even are aware of these concepts. But somehow, intuitively, we know what they do to us when we feel some kind of solace or some kind of excitement or some kind of sorrow. That's why I find that when a teacher teaches, it's in a way a good shortcut to use the example, because the example incorporates the gesture, the technique, with the purpose of the line's points of arrival, the phrasing. I can just do articles and words, alphabetize, or a spell check like we do for a spelling bee competitions, or I just seize the opportunity to say a few words very fast. Or then I spread these very same few words so that you can reflect on what I just had said, provided that it's something that you would like to reflect on. But since as a musical sayer, the interpreter only in fact is a reteller of the text by somebody else, while temporary, ephemeral, but true identification brings us to say it's my music. During the moment I seize this instant of the passing present, it's not music of the past, it's not the music of the next generation. It's my time to go in front of it and say, ah, oh. And then the ears, in fact, do that ah, oh to us. Though, of course, that is when you listen to the music, because you can see it written. And in a way, it's so fulfilling. Because once you see it written, all the signs oblige you to organize rational thinking, analytical understanding, structural understanding. There's a purpose for this, there is a logic for that, but intuition and emotion don't always have to be justified by structure and logic. Even if that was fundamentally how classical written music in Western world developed, with the form as the essence. You don't play a sonata by Beethoven, you play a sonata first, then by Beethoven, or a sonata by Haydn. And they both use different themes, different ways of developing them. In other words, crossword puzzles. And then in Romantic era, we have the opportunity to break out of the form, which doesn't justify anymore the essence. The essence is the form. It is becoming a tone poem. It becomes free speech, not organized, structured group of syllables with a rhyme, not a sonnet, not anything, just this sheer emotional flow. And what does stitching become? A negation of this early call through the ear, the soul, the emotion, at which level it places itself. Sometimes some people are more driven to listen to their emotion, and others to be genetically drawn to be a little bit more, let's say, withheld and more thinking. And it's nothing wrong with that. That's how it's beautiful to have different artists express an emotional melodic line through their own reading, through their own psyche, through their own filtering. And that I speak about before studying, before even reading it notated. Just hear it by somebody and try to play it by ear, which is what most children do. I don't have the score, I didn't know even what the piece is, but I liked it so much when I don't know where I heard it, and I tried to get it by ear. So I reconstitute, perhaps not correctly, and for sure not precisely, but somehow I'm able to go into the text from what I heard. It's almost like a reverse engineering by not curiosity, but mostly by love, by drive, therefore, by attraction, by passion. I seize everything else because I want to get to it. And of course, if you get the score, then you connect through it, like when I said one learns a foreign language from the book. The book then becomes your vector, not what you heard of it. And if it doesn't correspond through the notation, or you find that the notation doesn't really translate what you've heard, when people, let's say, take freedoms with the text, those who you heard before you saw the text. You go to see a film without to know the script, having not read the book, just the storytelling, the way it's edited and told through the point of view of this or that director. And you can connect or disconnect from it, but you cannot compare it to something objective and see how subjectively it's translated, therefore interpreted. So if you know the Chopin waltz before you go hear it, that means that either you can read it, either you heard it by somebody, either you can read it and learn it by yourself, but ignoring what else exists about this piece from others, which nowadays is very difficult since everything is on all the time everywhere. It's more like, it's more difficult not to be too much influenced by the others than to have the reflective time to let it soak in from our own understanding and try to compare what the written signs on the paper, when brought alive by you compared to the person who made you love the piece before you saw the text, in fact did not bring out or brought out in a way that is not written in the text. And so you immediately realize that the written text, in fact, is imperfect in terms of the details. Or rather, it allows to subjectively or ideologically or just by sheer emotion without any reason of analytical point of view, to say, I like it this way. Or more. So that is the moment or the point where the student, becoming a young adult, has to say, okay, it means so many things to so many people, but originally I liked it one way, if you can even remember anymore. The original moment of the bewilderment, the excitement, the marvelment to hear this piece or these sounds or this word. You don't even know what it means, but when your mom says it over your crib, it sounds so good. And perhaps you don't need, in order to understand the music, to know the language, the grammar of music, the harmonic, the melodic, the contrapuntal, the facts of how music is spelled in order to be transmitted through a one-dimensional document and then come alive again through your psyche, emotion, meaning, and through and you feel like I spend all my life trying to get to it back. From the original moment, my ears got me to love it. And if there were a whole cycle of learning, I'm told by all the teachers, no, you're not supposed to do this. No, the pedal is not supposed to be there. No, you shouldn't be doing the rubato. Don't give accents to the beats. Left hand softer, right hand longer. Breathe. Imagine singing. Sing it to yourself. Try to see if you can find a more natural tempo. Well, I'm sorry, imposed to you that singing. Fa, sol, mi, fa, si, of course, if you develop your breathing support like an opera soprano, you could hold 15 seconds of some notes. Of course, you're not. You practice the piano to be evocative of the voice with the decay of the instrument. But you don't sing. Literally, you imitate, you evoke the singing. You don't dance. You evoke the dance. You don't play an orchestral group of timbres that are mesmerizing by their colors or tone colors, because you only have one, which is the piano color. So you do with lights and shadows, short and long values, pedal, no pedal. So in a way, it's constantly hinting something that the piano is evocative of, except the pieces which are written for it as a non-imitation of another genre, like a fugue or a sonata, for instance. Though that is also a question, because you can characterize a fugue with a mood, when by essence the fugue is contrapuntal alignment, organized, well-behaving parts in society, and creatively and beautifully for the gestural elements, even of the inner voices that you don't always hear, at least you're not trained to hear. But when you train and you hear, you appreciate. Therefore, you could say that in a way, if a Bach fugue is very vindicative, like D major book 1, and you start with 8:30 seconds on the second beat, and then you have only slow dotted rhythms, immediately you think, as I just did, oh, it's decisive. He's launching, he's not longing. He's right away. And so the arrival note, in this case the B after the opening D, which is barely heard, is as if you rise to that B and then you slowly drop halfway between. So you realize that something is thrusting you forward, and then you slow down. But if you decide to be more rhythmical and less playing it only through the thrusts of the influx and reflux, you can play. And that's not wrong. As a matter of fact, it's correct in terms of the notation and the groupment of notes. But if you do it with rubato, there's one thing you cannot do on the piano, is glissando between the notes, which you can do in the voice, or in the string play or the wind. So inevitably, it's very precise pitches, which are tuned by somebody mostly else than oneself, because pianists don't know how to tune, me neither. And so inevitably, it's not the pitch, it's not the ear towards the intonation for singers, wind players, and string players. They don't have a keyboard with buttons to push. We do. But then we try to think of them as a voice. I'd like to tell you how much that. So then it helps you by imaginary lyrics, regardless how silly as these ones were. It motivates you. And you say, I'm going to play this fugue evocative of the motet, evocative of an opera trio, evocative of a brass trio quartet, depending how many voices they are. So you take a determined choice to colorize by characterization a piece which is essentially not an imitation of another genre like singing or dancing on the keyboard. So even so, you can say, okay, I can be more neutral. To which extent one is really neutral? That's a good question to ask oneself. Because it's easy to say, oh, you overstate it, oh, you over-involve yourself in it, or you choke the piece by what it means to you when you play it. Let it just go. The craftsmanship to allow it happen. It just blossoms in front of your eyes. You don't have to put makeup, so to say, allegorically on the melodic line and make a beautiful hairpin. You can just go. So you can say, okay, it's early romantic in our understanding of things in terms of the chronology we learn, because Schubert is before Chopin. But in fact, for its time, it was very expressive. And Bach, and for Scobaldi, and Ligeti today, and the others. In other words, everybody was present, romantic and modern and classic in their own time, and popular, literally, in their own time too. Rachmaninoff's music was very popular even in his time. It's like Picasso's paintings. But the point is that in the painting is in the eye of the beholder that the interpretation is done. Not that the painter has to repaint it every day in front of you, like we do when we replay the same piece again, but differently after all, because inevitably the elements make us play differently, even if we aim at finding some kind of reliable likeness, not surprised by the unexpected. But that's what makes the intensity of the moment. That's what brings the emotional flame, because it becomes something vulnerably strong, something like life. You have to be very strong in terms of your biological elements to survive, bypass the different ways that your body structure is attacked by nature, by being alive, besides medicines. And so there is some kind of an incredible sense of physical energy to a certain extent of life, and then the emotional or the intellectual projection, which is usually more ahead of what the body can do. And at some point when you're young and have mastered your technique to a point to which you can express with a certain confidence but not arrogance, though nor vulnerability to be fearing to trip on the unexpected every time. So you have some kind of balance between what you know you control and what you know you have to be aware of. And then the unexpected happens even in the sections it never happened. And that is something that I think the audience respects, because we come for a happening, literally. The painter doesn't repaint it in front of us, and the poet doesn't restate it again with new words. It's our gaze, our understanding. Perhaps you take an arts critic next to you, or an arts professional who will explain to you the painting that you're looking at. And you might like it without the need to be explained. I like the colors, I like the shapes, I don't understand, or I don't care to understand if there is any symbolism in this or any hint in that. And as soon as you're told this by a knowledgeable person, you start looking at the score, I was going to say, at the painting, really more like you look at the score compared to what you heard from it in your ears. And here you start understanding what you're already seeing from the painting. And when you're told these elements, you start thinking like in Mozart's A minor sonata. he wrote it at the mother's death of his in Paris when he was a teenager. We all have a mother, we all were teenagers, of course we are not all Mozart, and we imagine that we identify, we appropriate this, I would say, alarming accompaniment of repeated notes, which he's not doing the usual Alberti for the accompaniment, but the melody also repeats. So there's something desperate at the get-go. Well, of course, desperate for 18th century, early 19th century to be, but obviously we have more expressive music for this kind of elements of torment and intense translation of an emotional stage. In this case, it's not the imitation of the Baroque music of the dance and the singing. Here it's the translation of the emotional being. But if you don't know, or you're not told that this is written at his mother's death, you still feel like the Sonata K310 is universal. It expresses emotionally something even today, centuries after, without to be told what. And the Funeral March by Chopin in his second sonata is mentioned as such on the score. So you can say, okay, these are program music. They are connected to death in a different way of expressing it. But does music only exist? Of course not, to only translate our other ways of expressing our art or our life through pictorial, dance, mime, sing, combine art in an opera. Of course, in film, in video game, in 3D, it's all about storytelling, all about emotion in situations. And I think of Debussy being very, I would say, if not clever, at least thought-provoking about it, by asking his publisher Durand to publish the titles of his preludes, which are evocative of all these elements of nature, or like the girl with the flaxen hair and all that. Immediately when you know the title and you play, you cannot not think of the flaxen hair, since you know that's what it is. Now, the first time you might have read the score, and because he asked the publisher not to put the title on the top of the first page, as always indicated, but at the very end, after the last page's last note, was a way to hint, don't get too much into the title influencing you into what the music is supposed to reflect, and let the music itself see how much it will trigger in you something. So regardless if you know or you don't the history of a piece, either if the composer, like in the Tempest by Beethoven sonata, by essence sonata is the form, but if you on top of it have to add a character saying this is the imitation or the evocation or the psychological positioning in a tempest, therefore something driven with emotion and unstoppable flow. So what? Of course you can think, oh, it's a fun dance. Or no, I'm in anxiety because of the tempest. So the interpretation is tainted by either what you're taught or told or read that it's supposed to be, that the music is representing, or sound painting. And those were obvious examples because they came with their titles, even if in Debussy after the piece. But once you've read it, that's it. You cannot pretend when you start working on it that, I don't remember what it was called. Interesting. Oh my God, it's so incredibly, oh, I feel like in the morning in the prairie, or I'm smelling this rose. So yes, sensorial reaction, again, like the baby with the ears, corresponding to cocooning or daydreaming. In other words, non-analytically factual situations. And then, of course, you watch how a fugue is organized in terms of the polyphony of the layered organization of voices that don't collide, but they sort of blossom into something incredibly majestic or grand or elevated. We're superposing voices, and you think, if I'm in the middle of a five-voice fugue by Bach, am I in the middle of the intensity of the musical thought of the composer? Or am I in an emotional expression of an aria like opera? And because within that you can be mentioning it with a lesser intensity, if it corresponds to your, let's say, psyche, understanding, filtering, appropriation, learning or rejecting or accepting this or that teacher, nobody agrees. But ultimately you play it. And when you play it, it has to correspond to, in a way, how you're constructed in your own psyche, emotional and intellectual being. You're not just sensorial and only cerebral, you're a bit of all. And the music approaches you and attacks you in a way, it doesn't attack you, but it overwhelms you through one or another of those channels, and sometimes both or more. And so the question is that in the written text, you don't know if he expected you go. So that's why I was saying that teaching by the example bypasses all these stylistic, analytical, in fact scholastic explanations of what these are in terms of the grammar of the harmony, the melody, the organization of the sounds, the delay tactics. And then you know Chopin and his 19th century composer, and then you think of the others or other of his pieces. So you can say, okay, I'm going to privilege just free speech. From my heart to yours, directly. And if I play a fugue by Bach, I feel like I'm reciting some kind of scripture. I do communicate it, but not so directly with you than in the waltz by Chopin. I can say, oh, how elegant, or oh, how poignant. And what about both? Oh, how unnatural. Just play it without too much makeup. It's all in the music. You don't need to add anything. Really? So what's the point of the example? Because in the example, in fact, part of it is what you were taught yourself before you teach it ahead. The tradition, my teacher, the way I was taught, the way I ended up liking it, the way I reject other ways of people liking it, the way they're not supposed to play it like this because they don't understand it like I do. You've heard that a lot of times said by many people, regardless if they teach or not. Anyway, yes, they circumscribe their own taste and they contrast it by inevitably criticizing the taste of the others by being bad. Simply. Sometimes it's not even as subtle. Let's put it politely. And the point of the demonstration is that, in fact, do you or are you expected to express some kind of objective, factual element from the music, letting the individual listener blossom it into their own psyche, into an unforgettable, whatever it is, garden, sunset, girlfriend, gaze, pet, smell, sunrise, some kind of connected element to the emotion that this piece brings to you, besides what it's supposed to be, which is an allegory or evocation of a waltz. Earlier in my studies, I also accompanied ballet dancers. And ballet dancers don't need the phrasing or the expression. When they study it, they have to organize their steps according to the choreography, not according to the group of bars of the music writing. I mean, they don't have to, sometimes they do, but the point is that for them, they practice the gestures and they have to coordinate them so that it aligns with the music. So what you do as an accompanist, ballet pianist in rehearsals, you do... Per se, you play anti-musical, for what we think it's musical at least. But you emphasize the beats. So it's not 4 bars of 3/4, it's 12 beats, which represent a certain amount of steps that they have to execute perfectly according to the choreography, just like we do according to the phrasing, or what we're taught also to do in terms of the connection of the notes. And then the fingerings coming from the phrasing choice, which then after the fingerings comes to substitutions or arrangements with the different hands to take them elements that are too stretched for one or the other. And then some composers don't even take advantage of the fact that it's implayable, so you can use the pedal then to connect things. All this, for the dancers, when they study it, they need the beats. Because it's very physical, to say the least, to dance. And then I played with them during the performance. And I remember the ballet director telling me, now you'll play musical, right? Meaning that not... But that's how we rehearsed it, so they can learn their parts. It's like when we practice under tempo for the alignment of the fingers or rhythms, or 1 and 3, or 1 and 8. So in fact, we do this kind of detailed work too. For the fingers, they do it for the legs, the arms, the whole body. And I remember that when I played with them live and they were dancing, after we had rehearsed so many times, but in a way, chopped performance, as I called it. Since per se, it's a melodic, elegant evocation of a waltz. And if on top of it I was to add rubato, which some people consider indispensable for Chopin, even if it's because it's not written, just like the bel canto arias of operas, Bellini and others, he used to like. And then you have these vocalises which are decorative and improvised by the singer, the vocalise. And so he could say, okay, I'm going to do a slight delay and slightly forward. And then hold back. So I subdivide the group of 4 bars of the sentence with 2 legato, 2 staccato. This, 2 beats, 2 bars of 3, and then... But it has to be the consequence of the first 2. What if Chopin had started with the staccato? And then the next 2? No, he didn't, but he could have. So the question is, how much do we bring out the difference between the legato and the staccato with the 16th note rest, even if he indicates pedal over it, which means that in a way then you don't hear the rests other than in the resonance or the residue. See, there are ways to mask it so you can only follow the melody dropping step, and if it's legato, or or slightly flowing with little interruptions. So to which extent do you want to bring out the characteristic contrast of the articulation versus the unity of the phrase on 4 bars of 3/4 instead of 2 bars of 3/4 legato singing, 2 legato, but rather aired with interruption, almost staccato, so you have... Oh, but it's too much! Contrast. Why didn't Chopin just write? Honestly, that anybody would consider it less good. Oh, Chopin's lazy today. He doesn't surprise us with unexpected. And what if you write a piece like this? Your composition teacher will say, oh, you need to do something. You cannot just constantly hold long values. And why not then the whole piece? So the rewriting, rethinking rather than writing. I think outside of the box. But what do? I think freely because I want to play more freely what he really wrote. Not just because I recite it because it's written. Only. But also because I've heard it, I loved it, then I read it, then I have to play it. And if I accompany the dancers, it's because they need the beats. But when I sing it through the piano to imitate the aria in the right hand and the dance in the left hand, as Chopin used to say, supposedly my right hand ignores what my left hand does, then I'll play a rubato between the two hands, slightly dislocated a la Cortot. So an interpreter who doesn't teach, literally a performer, in a way teaches through the playing. Well, it's not teaching, it's more about convincing. It's not even conviction. You hear the reading of the performer as well as the hearing for which he has or she has a certain touch. Mezzo pianissimo or mezzo forte or forte. You don't choose either because it's on the score. Okay, but you have to define what is a Chopin mezzo compared to, let's say, Brahms or another style. So even that is relative. So then you have to enter inside your musicianship the two elements, the intuitive, the ear, the emotional, with the learned, understood, in a way analyzed, and then make them hold hands together. And then you say, as a performer, through your playing, rather than through your words, obviously, you don't speak in concert, I think it's a lyrical piece. By minimizing the amount of the interrupted dotted rhythms of the second half of the 4 bars. But if on the other hand you think, oh, it's a waltz, after all, imitation of dance, I need to hear the downbeat and the second and third beat repeated because that gives me the pace or the gestures, the choreography. That's more like dancing through, and this is more singing through. So your interpretation skews things in one direction that you want to say, not rubato at all. It's enough beautiful as it is. It doesn't need me to add on top of it a rubato of tempo pulse fluctuation. So what is the good taste of the person who thinks it is could be received by the listener as a bad taste, especially if they're already hearing it by others who play it with less rubato, and then they say, it's too much. And if the opposite happens, it's not enough. And so you end up by being in a situation where you don't know anymore, really, as a student, between what you're told, between contradictory opinions, as well as convictions rather than opinions for each, is valuable, as a matter of fact. And then the score, which is supposed to be the objective connection to the authenticity, but then it leaves lots of room for interpretation, or therefore betrayal in the eyes of some composers. So how much, if any, rubato, how much singing compared to the dance aspect of the waltz, how much the evocation of the dance is in the left hand, playing two hands, one which is the bass note with the melodic roots, and then the harmonization. And Chopin often uses this two hands, one hand situation where you hold the pedal to connect the harmony with the rhythmic harmonization of the second, third beat. And then on that, you have the melody with the lip of the sixth melodically, which is so expressive. Then of the fifth, and then you close melodically the sixth, the fifth, the fourth. So you can say, okay, I have already two hands in one in the left hand, bass and harmonization in a 3 beats rhythm of waltz. In the right hand, a meaningful leap of the sixth, which is in fact the hugging of the perfect fifth. It's an appoggiatura. If I go, it's too factual. I arrived to C sharp so many bars later. I could have done because ultimately that's where my phrasing direction goes towards almost magnetically. Of course it's written, so obviously it's magnetically. You don't start and say, yeah, what if Chopin didn't want right away? And finally, the C sharp, even if it's on a 6th degree. Another harmonic delay tactics through the sequences of the cadences where you have the deceptive one. The melody goes to the tonic, but not the root. Until ultimately, like in a run-on sentence, you finish the phrase. So you could also think in terms of intellectual, conceptual, analytical view that the leap of the 6th and then everything else drops by smaller increments and ultimately finishes on the bottom C sharp. So reducing it like this gives you the direction. And then, when you play like it's written, keeping in mind that magnetic appeal towards the horizon line, you can get distracted because you forget where you're going since you take so many detours before you reach where you need to go. But then, as the philosophers say, it's not the arrival point that matters. The journey is the point itself. In other words, what you experiment from point A to B is more meaningful than reaching B. If ultimately B is your aim, and therefore you have to go towards it by motivation, by attraction, by passion, call it anything you want, but you cannot shorten it because Chopin took a certain number of bars, organized it with a certain amount of decorative patterns and interrupted figures of rhythmic dance compared to the song that's interrupted or connected, or perhaps one after the other. And it is, in a way, you reach a point where you're saying something like, I read it after I heard it, or I first read it, then I heard it, and therefore I'm playing it as I like it, in order for you to share the emotion I had when I read it. Because if you play for them the bar lines like in a dictation they would take of the piece, thank God they don't. It's not an ear training class, a recital. It's really a restatement through your own understanding, psyche, and wisdom and analytical knowledge, all combined. I don't think one should prevail on the other, as it's dangerous when you start learning too much compared to not wanting to know too much. I don't want to know. Ignorance was bliss. It was emotion. I knew exactly where I was intuitively. I don't know how to call these inertable notes, but it doesn't matter what I call them as long as I feel them. I feel the tension, the release, the consonance, the dissonance, remotely, vaguely. I don't know if I can put words on it. I'm not supposed to be a musicologist. I'm just a pianist. Devil's advocate. But it is true that you bring your audience to a journey by your phrasings, like the editing on a film. If you watch a car chase, you realize you've seen a car chase, you might see another car chase if it's all for a different film. But it's the way you film the car chase, by editing rhythmically, dynamically, the cameras showing one or the other of the cars and in which pace, and how you obtain the sense of vertigo, or perhaps the camera is very low and you see the floor go fast. The same thing with the second section of this waltz. It can be mesmerizing if you go progressively faster. And this is based on the first of each 6/8 notes. Which you did through a whole group of notes. Got to it. And here you go to it faster. So here you experiment the visual, if you've danced or you watch people dance waltz, where they spin and spin and spin, and it becomes a vertigo of excitement, of lightness of head. Literally, since of the irrigation of the blood in the head, but it never says start andante, finish prestissimo. You could say nothing, or you could suggest yourself that now I have only the pattern, no more the melody with the dance. Is not? It's all flow of 8 notes. And if you play it in the tempo of the A section, you realize that then you're in tight ropes, because you think, okay, am I allowed to play that actually around? Am I allowed to suggest that my head is spinning by dancing and turning? Am I supposed to hint it or really inhabit it? Or just... And then you have the pedal. If I hold it longer, I hear the harmonization. And instead of the arpeggio with passing tones, which is sort of hybrid arpeggio, it's not just arpeggio, no chromatic, or any other kind of pattern, broken thirds or something. So he chose it, and we don't have to for him, but we have to play it with the meaning that we think it meant to him, or at least that we imagine it meant to him, or perhaps it doesn't matter how it meant to him, because after all he's gone and his music is with us, not him. So regardless if I'm betraying him, I will not betray myself according to how it means to me, because on the fierce moment of now, I am under the piece's spell. And I translate to you how enticing it is to me today, now, not then or after, and how my student will play it or how my teacher played it, because in a way at some point I play it. And I have to play it with the way I respond to the piece, according to what I felt from it, what I learned from it and from others, and then it has to become all in the phrasing, articulation, pedaling. That's why my example teaches by itself more than my explanation, or perhaps my explanation dissects some of my intuitive, if not always intellectual, reasons for which I got to the way I play it, or changed my mind since I learned it. Then the Neapolitan 6 with the scale calls for a surprise slowdown because it is an altered flat second degree, which, even if we don't know it's that in terms of the, how do you call it, you feel like this is cold, it's striking, it's emotional, because you've got, then you would flow because the second degree is half seven, sorry, is the grammar of music, but it is the notes of the scale. Whenever the D natural is a way to enhance, that's really the makeup harmonically, to make it darker under the eyeshadow. And with the chromaticism at the top, return to the lightness of the beginning after this dramatic or over-dramatized altered degree, which creates a sense, to me at least, of gravity or something cold. And then I regain the tempo at the top because I feel like I'm suggesting that this was so striking I could not take the time to just allow it to express my educated or cultivated or surprise. Obviously I'm not surprised since I practice it and I know it for decades. Actors faint, fake, fainting, but at some point it's so believable you think they really are. And that's the beauty of it, the rupture of disbelief. And if Chopin wrote, or now I'm going to oblige myself not to do any rubato while I play the Neapolitan Sixth. I don't know it's going to come. I ignore it purposely. Close my eyes. Of course you hear it still, it's there, it's in the music. The harmonic color changed, you didn't change the pulse, the pace, you didn't slow down, you didn't tell them, hey, watch it, this is dramatic. No, you just go through it and you let the harmonic color by itself suggest psychologically to you that something incredibly darker happened than the regular minor during those two bars of scale. And so it's very tempting for a teacher to say everything is in the text, you don't need to overstate it. But then at some point you feel like, as an artist or musician or craftsman, regardless how you see yourself in service of the muse, and you want to be earnest and honest and you want to be closest to the authenticity because that's why you study about it. If not, you always play it by ear approximately. If you look at the scores because you want to be precise, detailed, and you want to know everything about it as if you wrote it, which helps by writing it from memory actually. Of course, it takes too long. But I was taught like that because then you think of the thought processes of the composer rather than only through your fingers. But since the composer, in the case of Chopin, was really finger composer, likely he also composed it after improvising it. So there is a sense of incredible combination in Chopin, for instance, of spontaneous expression and sophisticated harmonic dressing, elegant and driven, passionate and with certain distance, but not too much to be cold and not too close to be, let's say, perhaps over-involved. And who defines the good taste from the bad? Where is the thin line between too much or not enough of involvement, rubato, expression? If you don't do anything, somebody could say, oh, he doesn't feel the Neapolitan Six. Somebody will say, how marvelous he didn't slow down because he kept the pace of the waltz. And it's in the music. It doesn't need to be surlined. But you know, it's in between the two. if you're corseted by the fact of not allowing to express what it means to you while you play it, like you narrate the story that you're telling, or you are the character, or you're narrating the character. But if you're the character and at the same time the narrator, it becomes a redundancy. And that's why we think, oh my God, it's obvious that everything is in the score. When Beethoven writes his D major 7 sonata, he goes for the development surprise, flat 6, B flat major in D major. He should have gone to relative minor. Yes, he should. And that would have been expected, especially as a student, be it rambunctious, and that's thankful for us, of Haydn, because he breaks little by little and more through his age the form that he received from Haydn. But regardless of this psychoanalytical situation of Beethoven's development, I was just gonna say, how do you play it to bring the surprise? Because he doesn't do a dominant to prepare you to B flat major flat 6. He uses it as an open dominant of D major and directly. So once you start B flat major, you know that the A is no more the dominant, but it's already the leading tone of the dominant of B flat. And he purposely stays there ambiguously. But if you had used it on the 4th beat, not as a B flat, but as an A sharp, leading tone to the relative minor, which would have been the expected thing to do, you would be less surprised. But can you reproduce that surprise every time you play it? Okay, you fake it, you feint it, you fake the feint, whatever. I don't know why I get so excited when I teach. I guess it's the inhalation of the music. I get so high from the music. The dead scrolls come alive. The notes. It's miraculous, actually, how much stuff is meaning to us out of very few signs laid on the paper. When, whatever, when, way, when. Away from our daily now. But then it becomes so fiercely present, so meaningfully present, so indispensably present. And you can call it escapism, and it is true. I like to be in escapism. I like to be on the moon. I don't want to be here. I would like to be on the beach. I don't want to be here. I want to be with somebody I cannot be with, but I'm still here. So I can daydream, I can suggest, I can have several layers of thoughts, and at the same time in my action. But the fact that we play a piece that is being played, rehearsed, repeated, published, written for, how can I say, surprise! First of all, it's not a surprise for you because you've practiced it so much, you repeat so much over and over that the effect of the surprise has, for sure, deteriorated or gone, evaporated. But when you play it in public, you have to fake that in fact you're surprised. Actually, what would be really fun, see the flames in my eyes when I think outside of the box, is if somebody dared really do the relative minor. That would be more surprising because now everybody knows he goes to flat 6 because everybody knows this sonata. Sorry for the F sharp. Now, is that right to teach like that? No. That's like perversion. Do I teach like this to my students to tell them, just surprise them by playing what's not written in order to appreciate better what is written? I think you do that before you perform for people. And if you don't feel like being daring like this, and you think like you don't need to explore outside of the box other options in order to appreciate the one he really chose, and you'll play with conviction, at least, I hope, more than only because it's there. And perhaps not all sections can have the same meaning or deferred meaning, but the fact is that you bring it alive, it means something to you, and you don't have the time to compare to everybody else's ways. Of course, today more than before, with the capacity to hear many interpretations by clicking. But even so, you get more lost than more convinced, or more vindicated in your intuition. They say, I was right to feel that. The others don't know it. They don't understand it. They pass next to it, didn't even appreciate it. I will show in my playing how much it's meaningful to me. And that, I think, is essential. Because then you play to your audience your reading of the piece from the emotion you received from it in the first place in a combined, harmonious way of intuitive and knowledgeable. And I think you enjoy as much what is written compared to what you imagine it could have been, because when you play it like it is, you play it with a purpose, more than even a conviction, if ever. And you can change conviction through life. After all, I've been playing for so many decades now that some pieces I knew earlier, I hear differently now. And not drastically. It's not like, oh, he plays fast or slow, what he played slow and fast when he was younger. That is something you can easily compare and contrast on recordings, because after all, the legacy stays there. The recording doesn't change, it still repeats itself, no matter how many times you hear it. But who changes is you, as a listener, as an awareness artist, as a evolving artist who discovers more layers to the piece than what he or she saw earlier when they had to study it. And the more you dig, the deeper you dig, and the more you give, you dig, the more it gives, and the more you realize, oh my God, there are these incredible elements I've never taken into account in my interpretation earlier, either because I was just worried about going through it, because after all, you have to also play it. There is no great artistry without technique. Without technique, you cannot fake. Well, you can, but it's not right. First of all, you only cheat yourself. But the technique, for the sake of it, doesn't solve the problem. The technique to bring out your vision, hearing, understanding of the piece, that's what matters. The conductor doesn't have to do it. He lets the others do it, or he demands it from the others. But here you have to demand it from yourself. And in order to know what to demand, you have to study, analyze, combine the group of bars and everything, and then you have a map, GPS direction of how to go, where to go, 65 miles, and I turn left, and then 55 miles an hour, and then there is a way of pacing the trip. And that is what the notation is about. But in between those things, your secondary thoughts, you can be driving and daydreaming of something else. You can be playing and thinking, oh, he should have gone flat 6. I know that most pianists don't study harmony in terms of interpretation tool, understanding of the piece while they learn the notes and then the fingers in order to play it. So the industry of playing is not separated from the grammar understanding of the structure of the sentence, and then you put it all together in real time. Even if you don't have to constantly think of it all. But I find it fascinating that, in fact, most of the performers who don't teach inspire young artist students by their performances without words. And they come and I say, God, I heard such and such, and it was amazing, and wow. And then you have the lesson of the teacher who says, try this finger, not the balance of the hand, the thumb, not too flat, the articulation. Maintain the position, anticipate. So, yes, teacher deals with very specific facts, how to, according to each pianist's different morphology, approach a section, a piece, a movement, a phrasing, just a line. And of course you can do it on the way in example, and like in the beginning and you could like your teacher and say, wow, I like it like him. And then the teacher goes, oh, I like that the student likes it like me, because that's very rewarding, you know, clone, clone, clone. Play like me. Feel like me. Basically, do like me. It's a shortcut to all the other elements of writing it, analyzing it, memorizing it, organizing it, layering it, putting it together. But Professor, I won't have time to do that with each piece. There's so many pieces I need to learn. The repertoire is so incredibly rich and diverse and very, very big for my instrument. So the answer to this is okay. You can choose to go in depth, but it takes certain time. And perhaps it doesn't take that much time, then perhaps I over-exaggerate when I present as I did the details. But if you don't try, you wouldn't know. You can always think in theory, yeah, I know, but I bring out this and there, and the rest I just follow my fingers. And it gives an illusion of an interpretation with some choices. And it's true. In a way, then, it reveals itself different in a different instrument with the emotion that you have, perhaps stage fright, and all of a sudden you don't recognize the piece because you don't know the piece really, in terms of its grammar, in terms of its modulations, in terms of its GPS motion forward where it goes. And then it reveals itself to you that it puzzles your ear, since your ear and your fingers were the connectors, and you didn't pass by the brain and the eyes to absorb all into one. So then you have this. That's why I think the example is essential, because in a way it's like the cooked food. Before you explain the steps of cooking it until it becomes what it is, but then it has to take its time to cook or to boil or to broil or whatever. But often the cooking shows, they show you after 5 minutes, and this is how it's going to look. After you've done this, and that, let it stay for this, for that time, and you know that you understand how the ingredients have to settle. Can't rush it. And I think that since most of the performers are not composers, they don't think in terms of the compositional aspect. They think of the other end of it, which is the written notes that I have to reproduce with my fingers. And if at some point you can develop a depth of understanding of what's going on while you play the melody or while you play the rhythmic accompaniment, other than only how it fits in the synergy of the hands memory, muscular memory, which is essential to play something like this. Because if you have to think of every movement of each finger even faster, inevitably at some speed like this, autopilot, muscular memory. But in the slower sections, you have the time to prepare the sound, the phrasing, the shaping, the interruption, the connection. So you have a room for more interpretation, a room for more velocity. In that sense, you could go to a concert and hear an artist play the waltz, or you can take a lesson with a teacher who explains to you what the score says about the waltz and then tries to find you fingerings that you don't cut the melody in the middle because you run out of fingers with substitutions, but without the pedal, which while enhancing the resonance for the harmony also blurs the melody, since melody is by step motion most of the time, exception of this beautiful leaps. But then the harmony is, you don't have a pedal for the left hand and a pedal for the right hand. You don't have two keyboards. The piano is all one. And perhaps all this is unnecessary when you have such an incredibly intense intuition that you just play it right away without not knowing all, but you feel it and somehow your ear guides your fingers. And you say, I'm an autodidact, I taught myself. I don't need anybody to explain to me anything. Sometimes the incredible power of this intuitive hearing, bringing it to the tip of the fingers on the piano, because it's less demanding technically than organization of a sound to produce of a string instrument. But still, you push buttons obviously on the piano. You don't use the pitches, and you don't have to tune it, or you don't have to, at least if you can. You're not responsible for the intonation, let's put it this way. But you're responsible for is the imitation of the song, imitation of the dance, and the velocity, and in a way, you bedazzle your listener because they hear what it means to you rather than you reciting it with a group of bars. If they hear the bars in your playing, too much structural. And if they don't, then perhaps too much rubato. So how do they hint it? Do you give them the downbeats louder? Or you just erase any sense of heavy downbeat? And then you bring out the upbeat? Because you don't know if this is an upbeat or a downbeat because there's no music before it starts. You interrupt the silence with the first note. And with the last note, you enter back in the silence. So you interrupted the silence with this music, with an upbeat, and you finish with a downbeat.